Okay, so we're here for electronic literature and digital storytelling. We'll start with Jonathan Gomez, Assistant Professor of Chicanic Studies at San Jose State University. He's also a faculty in residence for HSI initiatives at San Jose State. Gomez's scholarship and teaching center the connections between Chicanx cultural expression and urban social movements.
All right, thank you so much for being here, and all of you for making time to touch base. So I'm actually involved in several humanities projects, well, digital humanities projects. One of them is called the Cultural Work of Poetry, and it's a reading, discussion, and writing series here in San Jose in partnership with the San Jose Public Library. And I received a grant from the California Humanities Project for All. And what I'll be talking with you today about is an initiative and a project that comes out of the HSI work that I'm doing here at my campus. And it involves digital counter storytelling here. And so let me share my screen. I was having some trouble earlier, but I think I can do so now. Yeah. Oops, let's see. Here we go. All right, can y'all see that? All right, so, oops, sorry about that. Let me see, where's the slideshow? Is it still visible to you? Okay, great. It's a blank screen on my end, but I'll trust that you can see it. So invited me in for all the organizers that put this wonderful institute together. And I want to share that, I want to say that the ideas I share with you this afternoon are only as genuine and honest as the shared agreements and relationships I have with community artists, activists, educators, and organizers, people who I believe are at the leading edge of redefining what we mean by education and knowledge, yet often go unrecognized and uncompensated as thinkers and valuable members of our society. The Digital Counter Storytelling for Student Leaders project builds on the best community-centered traditions of the humanities. Chicano poet and activist Luis J. Rodriguez notes that artists are not special kinds of people. Rather, everyone is a special kind of artist. And I extend this formulation to include storytellers and poets, right? And that is, everyone is a special kind of storyteller, and everyone has a special story to share that registers their own humanity in relationship to the humanity of others. And this formulation does not presume that every single person can master equally the technical skills required to produce great art or stories. Rodriguez explains, however, that Chicanx community-grounded artists and organizers believe that participation in creating art and stories can equip everyone with an augmented capacity to, quote, recognize dignity and precious energies that exist in every person, end quote, to discern value in undervalued peoples and places, and to become creative thinkers and problem solvers capable of forging solutions, even with limited materials. Similarly, literary scholar Doris Sommer draws on the ideas of Immanuel Kant and Friedrich Schiller to identify the promise of the humanities as the potential to teach people to interrupt habit, cultivate discernment, make refined judgments, experience empathy, resist authoritarian single-mindedness, and learn to envision a creative common existence. And so the Digital Counter Storytelling for Student Leaders project does not just deliver academic humanities content to professors, but rather uses counter storytelling practices as a means of calling into being new social relations and new social practices based on the unique opportunities that the humanities offer for the purpose of structures of oppression through shaping through sharing their own voice, through shaping and sharing their own voice, dreams, and desires. And so I share that just to say that, you know, as a foundation, to say that this work did not develop in a vacuum. And here on our campus, this initiative, you know, started through the through some funding we received from Adobe grant, but also through what we call on our campus the Centro, which is the Chicanx and Latinx Student Success Center. And through this center, we've identified a particular framework, or we've developed a particular framework where we bring faculty members together to identify and to challenge dominant teaching practices, on our campus, but we know they exist on other campuses as well. But, within deficit thinking, the ways in which our students experience stereotype threat, imposter syndrome, internalized racism, and the rest here. And what we do is we really work on centering our students' strengths and values, right? Which we believe is cariño, confianza, conocimiento, conciencia, comunidad, and colaboración, right? Collaboration, community, consciousness, knowing, trust, and caring. And so through this initiative, right, we wanted to create a space where we can ground with faculty members and think deeply about these various frameworks or tools to do that kind of work, right? Through the Centro, we have a student leadership retreat where we gather with students and share these different kinds of practices. And these are a couple of quotes, and I'll read one to you, right? Through this acknowledgement of cariño, confianza, and those that were listed in the previous slide, was, one student mentions, I learned terms for things that I had been feeling and realized my experience was not something that I had to face alone. I gained a greater appreciation for my culture, things that before I had seen as strange, but are actually a source of strength. And so we wanted to take these things that we were learning from our students and develop a faculty learning community that can provide some of our faculty members with the skills to facilitate this kind of learning inside the classroom. And so we have, some the institutional support, right, to build a capacity to develop these digital counter storytelling faculty learning communities. And here's basically it's a 3-year initiative, but what I'm in charge of is basically facilitating these workshops with faculty members on the practice of counter storytelling. And so counter storytelling basically is a technique that elevates marginalized voices to disrupt mainstream narratives about historically underserved communities. Students produce narratives that connect their lived experiences to course content and learn how to record and share those stories with others. And that's where our digital tools come in hand. Faculty create meaningful social relationships with students and curriculum that is asset-based and relevant to their academic interests and social justice needs. And basically, I've had to become someone and to have conversations with faculty members about, recognizing our students not merely as people that, we have to teach, but also as people that, we have something to learn from. And in this instance right here, there's a photo of me standing with some of our students who are born and raised on the east side of San Jose, and they were part of an organization or a mobilization of people that stood up in their community when the oldest Chicano mural in San Jose was painted over in 2018. And so, as recognizing students as people to listen and learn from kind of takes you off the campus, and if you can't go off the campus physically, because I know that the job of being a professor is demanding enough, then to at least, recognize students, the different things that they're sharing in class, right? And it allows us to learn more about what's happening beyond the campus community to inform our classrooms and our conversations with real pressing issues that our students are faced with, right? And so it hasn't been easy, and I can talk with you about that, but we do have a group of dedicated faculty members that are open to learning these various pedagogies that center our students' needs, right? Center their experiences. And so basically, through this faculty learning communities, we recognize that, even for our faculty members that want to do this work, sometimes they can feel alone, right? And so for some other faculty members, right, they may, when they enter the campus, they may feel that immediately they find community, right? But for many others that want to do this work that kind of challenges these various forms of structures of oppression, or at least register them and have their students think about them, they can feel alone. And so one of the things that this faculty learning community tends to, or promises is to do is to create community through convenings on a regular basis. We have an institute in the summer, and every month throughout the semester, we get together and we engage in various kinds of workshops. And so here's kind of the way in which we developed the initiative. And so it was during the summer, it was a week-long institute. And so on day one, we had to ask questions about ourselves, right? Of who are we? Day two, who are our students? Day three, who are we in the classroom? Day four, what are the values of our discipline? And day five, how do we capture stories with Adobe? And this was, this part was tricky, right? Because although we have support from Adobe, we didn't want to be in a position to merely create commercials for Adobe or to highlight their technology in a way that disrespected who our students are, who we are. So a lot of the conversations throughout this institute was really getting to know one another and to identifying some of the various or some of the different needs that we identify our students express in the classroom, and really trying to just build a space where we can develop the tools that, you know, respect who our students are. And some of the things that people have been talking about today are some of the various things that we've been experiencing where students want to share their stories with us, but don't necessarily want them to be outside of the classroom. And so we're grappling with that. And I've already written down names of folks I want to touch base with to figure out how we can, you know, basically work through that. But, you know, we're very early stage. Our faculty, this was myself with members of our first cohort. And, you know, we have a faculty member from biology, nursing, sociology, Chicano studies, and counseling education. And essentially, as I mentioned, we're at an early stage, but, you know, our professor in biology is working on a project where she's capturing the voices and experiences of undergraduate women who want to, you know, pursue science as a career. We have a nursing faculty member who is working primarily with Black and Brown students who, because of the various constraints in the college itself, have a hard time finding opportunities that can lead them to see themselves as Black and Brown nurses. Our sociology professor is working on a project that showcases educational activism with various Asian American communities. And then in counseling education, we have our faculty member, you know, highlighting mental health as a key component of student success. And so, as I mentioned earlier, you know, with the project I'm working on with the Story Circle Pedagogies, mine is more engaged with community artists and activists and using poetry to build community. But, you know, we're at an early stage of this. And so I appreciate the opportunity to come and share about this. And I'm looking forward to the conversation, but I'll pass it over to Jessica, and I hope that, you know, we can engage in conversation. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jonathan. That was incredible. Let me go ahead and introduce Jessica. Jessica Pressman is professor of English and comparative literature at San Diego State University, where she co-founded our Digital Humanities Initiative. She studies and teaches 20th and 21st century experimental literature, digital literature, book history, and media studies, and is a very dear friend of mine. So please welcome Jessica.
Thank you so much. And that was just a really beautiful talk, Jonathan. I'm quite inspired. I'm going to share my screen. I hope to do so. And I'm actually doing something a little different. Can you all see? Okay. Rather than talking about a specific project today, I wanted to kind of chart a different genealogy for digital humanities altogether and situate myself in it, and hopefully provide also an introduction to thinking about the importance of poetics and narrative in the arts rather than technology and computing, and kind of think about just the way that different histories can be written to allow different entry points and possibilities for various people, as we've been talking about in terms of social equity in pedagogy. So this is less about pedagogy in a specific project than it is about my understanding of the field of digital humanities and my relationship to it. So let me briefly, hopefully briefly, show you quickly what electronic literature means to me, and how I do it in my own work, and why I think it's important to consider creativity and artistic practice as also a way of digital humanities. So let me just show you a little bit. I don't know how many of you know about electronic literature. So this is kind of my like quick slideshow of eLit from the 90s on, thinking about literature that's made on the computer and born on the computer, where computational and algorithmic processes are inherent to its poetics. So this is hypertext, which is what the World Wide Web was built as. This is one of my favorite works that got me interested in it back in graduate school. We also have Flash poetry, which was discussed earlier in terms of obsolescence.
Between my knife and my fingertips, there is my father. You shouldn't, he says, wants to know. Can't he just show me? Not so small. Taking the knife, followed by the sounds of thick red peppers on the cutting board, and my thigh against the stove. Like this. He teaches presentation, perfect arrangement on a plate, how to shake hands after church, firm, like this, making my hand fit in his like a puppet, the way vegetables are silent underwater. It's all in the presentation, he says, as if that's really all it is. I'll learn to present myself, a firm handshake, a straight back. I'll chop my peppers thick for my father, from whose kitchen I'll later move 1,000 physical miles from.
I'll just mention that that's 22 years old now, built in Flash, and my way of preserving it, as we were talking about obsolescence of media. When you actually teach digital literature, the shelf life of these works is 5 years, so you have to creatively figure out ways to save it. So this is a different type of genre completely. This is interactive fiction upon which video games are built. So this is Shade, and you read a section of the text, and then if you see at the bottom, there's a cursor command line, and you have to respond computationally about turn off the lamp or turn on the faucet in order to get the database to respond to your prompt and produce more text for you to read. So it's actually truly interactive. And again, this is the origin of video games. I'll skip I'll move to generative fiction and poetry. This is Eric Lawyer, who's at USC and one of the developers of Scalar, if you know that platform. He's going to talk in just a second. Maybe not.
You might notice as we're getting deeper into the experience that some strange things are starting to happen. We're starting to see some layers in the sky, see some other strange phenomena as you go on. The deeper you go, the more of these kind of things will occur. And it's up to you to kind of put all this together, get a sense of the story, and have a hand in shaping when this character decides to come in from the rain.
So literally have a hand in terms of thinking about also as the platforms change. So this is with the, the emergence of iPads, and Lawyer also did beautiful things with the emergence of cell phones and screens and that kind of haptic aspect. There's also, of course, locative literature that emerges across real spaces in real time, often using SMS messaging. This is a really old, wonderful project called the LA Flood Project, where you actually drive around Los Angeles and call in on your phone and hear pieces of a hypertext story about a flood hitting LA, but in a real space and time. So, and this is a kind of adaptation of that concept using Google Maps. J.R. Carpenter, a Canadian, now UK-based writer. So again, thinking about new technologies, even new social media platforms, inspiring artists and writers. Twitter has been a fascinating place for fiction, for Twitter bots. We had I brought this collaborative to campus a few years ago. This is one of these extraordinary works of multimodal fiction using the iPad and using the concept of exploring PTSD and also stream of consciousness. film, literature, the kind of blurring, and also the video game, the blurring of genres. This is how you engage with it to access the inner consciousness of a soldier returning home from war. You actually have to pry into his mind. There's also, I'm going really quickly because I just want to show you a few things, but of course, augmented reality, which a lot of you are familiar with and have clearly incorporated into your student projects even, where you hold up an object with a QR code.
A flamenco dancer.
In this case, images and objects that contain the stories of hidden female histories. And then I believe lastly, full virtual reality works that started back in the 90s in terms of installation art. Screen from 2003 made at Brown's Cave.
Reaches.
Shown below.
Under. Back. Of.
Created by Noah Wardrip-Fruin, who started the PhD program in computational media at USC. And also, I'll just say NetProv, because I know my friend DJ Hopkins is in a different room. So thinking about theater, electronic literature as a format for theater via largely the use of Twitter. And I won't go into immersive spaces right now. And I'll showcase that there is an entire organization, a scholarly and artistic organization devoted to the field of electronic literature, which is the ELO, the Electronic Literature Organization. And they do a large part of the work of archiving some of the works in the field. This is the very first collection that showcases and maintains some of the works that you just saw. So I gave that brief introduction to the genre that I study and kind of have devoted my scholarly and pedagogical work to, because I also want to point out that I'm showing you now a website that I just found from 2004, because when I started researching electronic literature as a grad student at UCLA, there wasn't anything called digital humanities. There just wasn't. And so I was working on electronic literature, or what was called digital storytelling. And I considered myself a scholar, a budding scholar of new media studies. And this was the first graduate conference on digital narrative across the UCs that I helped to organize with my friend, Jeremy Douglas, who's now at UC Santa Barbara. So when I came to San Diego State and was recruited in some ways to work on digital humanities, I kind of balked actually, because I'm like, I don't work in computational tools and I don't do big projects. I don't do text mining. Like none of the kinds of humanities computing histories made sense to me in terms of my work. But I since understand that there are alternative histories for this genealogy, and that's what I want to show you. And I recognized myself in the work of Tara McPherson, who's at USC, in her book, Feminist in a Software Lab, wherein she charts a different genealogy for digital humanities, one that goes back to, instead of humanities computing, one that goes back to art and creative practice. And so that is really where I see myself. And I also hope that we can kind of present an alternative histories in terms of creative storytelling that don't map back to people just working on computers, but are actually doing poetic or other kind of social equity projects. I'm aware of the time, Pam, right? Like you wanted us out in a few minutes.
We got a little bit of a late start, so I think it looks like we have 14 minutes remaining, so we still have plenty of time.
Well, I'll just go, I really would love to hear questions. So I'll just share one project wherein my collaborators and I, it's a book project, wherein that was the final project, but wherein we present electronic literature as digital humanities scholarship. And that was actually our intention, was to try and merge the two fields into one conversation. And it resulted in this book. But the project is actually looking at one work of digital literature, which is Project for Tech Histoscope by William Poundstone from 2005. And this is part of the work. It's a Flash-based work that flashes images and text and music, but also has subliminal messaging behind it. And so what we were trying to do was bring together three very different methodologies to analyze one work of digital literature and thus show how digital humanities needs electronic literature and vice versa. And I'll just quickly move through and show you Jeremy Douglas works on big data computational analysis. He was trained by Lev Manovich. And so he took every screenshot of that flash video and laid it out into a static image that you see before you. And that allows you to think of the work differently, right? Or when we think about taking a Shakespeare script and turning it into a play, it's a medial adaptation. And Jeremy did something similar here, which then allowed us to close read, which is what I do as a literary scholar, to read the surface differently, to look at the relationship between image and text, to see the subliminal words. Mark Marino, who invented the field of critical code studies, he hacked the code, he hacked the flash files to get the components of the work, to actually see what was happening beneath the hood, as he calls it. And we made some amazing discoveries at the level of the source code, including the word spam here in red, which never appears in the on-screen text, but clearly has meaning as a poetic device. So I won't go into this because I want Q&A, but I'll just say that the project was really illuminating in terms of what true collaboration can do, in terms of collaboration of people working in different methods with different perspectives, approaching one work of literature. Yeah, I won't go into all that because I want to save all that time. So one work of literature and trying to make the argument that literary criticism, especially of born digital works, has a lot to teach the field of digital humanities and vice versa. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Jessica. That was really wonderful. So we've got a little over 10 minutes for Q&A for both Jonathan and Jessica. And you can put your comments in chat, or if you want to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask a question. I'll give folks a moment. And if not, I can seed the questions.
Yeah, if I may, I was going to say that, well, thank you, Jessica, for that wonderful presentation. And, I was thinking, right, like what, an audience member that might be looking to, as part of the mentee program, what can they get out of what I presented? And I think that if I may say that, I'm engaged in projects that on this campus, at least the digital counter storytelling, by recognizing that a lot of the students, whether from Chicanx or Latinx communities, or just communities made up of students who are first generation or who come from communities that have been historically underserved, are expressing that they don't necessarily feel that they belong on campus, right? And they don't feel that they belong for various reasons, and so I'm engaged in a project that attempts to register, what those ideas are, and to create spaces on our campus where they can be seen, they can be heard. So for any of you looking at engagements like that on your campus, I'd love to talk with you more about that. And it is a kind of cross-disciplinary effort because I'm working with people, across the disciplines. And then the project that I mentioned earlier with the poetry project, I'm really interested. The promise of Chicanx studies is engaging in the Chicanx community. And so it's a way for me to utilize poetry to bridge our campus with, various community organizations that have poets and writers as part of their programming. And it's been really interesting. And so for those of you that are interested in kind of bridging out from your campus to organizations that are addressing social justice issues, I would love to talk more with you about that as well.
And I'll just follow up on one point that you made that I think is really important also, is that sometimes our students don't see themselves in the things that we're teaching. And for me, electronic literature offers an opportunity to say to them, look, you are on TikTok, you are tweeting, you are playing video games. Like those are all literary forms. Actually, like the tweet is a constrained poetic device. If you're really immersed in video games, you clearly have an understanding of image and text and movement, right? So for me, there is a real kind of applied method of reminding them that the reading and writing that they actually do in the real world matters. And frankly, I think we in the university, especially in English departments, have to keep up and make the argument that the stuff that we're teaching matters. So I always find that this is a kind of wonderful kind of bridge in that way.
Jessica, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the ways in which you engage your students in electronic literature production.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, Pam and I have done a lot of work there too. But really, actually, I mean, it's kind of shifting the focus to get them to think about what kind of acts of production they're already doing, because I actually think a lot of them are already doing modes of production of reading and writing stories, even if they're just responding to TikToks or producing their own. And so getting them to think about, the kinds of stuff that they're doing for fun as having a longer literary and artistic history, I think is one way for them to think historically and critically. And then you can start to engage. And where do you see yourself in this artistic history and this practice? That's actually how I engage, rather than like, let's produce something using the kinds of tried and true learning outcomes of an English literature class. I don't know if that answers, Pam. Does it?
It does, thank you. And it sort of speaks to me to what Jonathan was saying about counter storytelling and creating these spaces where students can tell their stories in ways that the sort of they own, rather than us sort of imposing it on them. And I think that both of your approaches really speak to that in really powerful ways. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, so I want to see if anyone in the breakout room has questions or comments for either of you.
No, we had a visitor this past Wednesday. We brought the author Luis Rodriguez. Oh, let's see. Did someone make a comment? I was talking. Oh, right on. So, thank you for that comment, Sarah. And we brought over Luis Rodriguez, who's an amazing, poet and advocate of literary spaces in I guess all around, but he has a wonderful space called Tia Chuchas in the San Fernando Valley. But our students, in the workshop that he facilitated, produced just amazing narratives. Some were willing to read them at the community event. But one thing I was going to bring up here is the fact that we have these connections with and I'm not sure how things are for you, Jessica, in San Diego, but here in San Jose, I find that a lot of our students are alums, right? They stay in the area. And so we're building these relationships with alum who, at this event, our students read. And then in the audience, there was a few people who are now English high school teachers, and they brought their students. And now we have something set up in the coming weeks where we're going to have our students engage with these high school students. And I just feel that these cross-campus relationships are so important. And I one of the reasons I love teaching at SJSU, I just feel like so many of our alums stay involved, and specifically with in this case, I guess with writing, they're looking for venues. And so I'm just thinking about how to utilize the resources of the university to create these venues, for members of the community that are looking for spaces to not necessarily to read their stories, but maybe just to be in community. And then they get inspired and something happens with these convenings, you know what I mean? And it's just it's really beautiful,
One of the things that we did way back in the day when, I showed that website from 2004, we had a lot of open mics, like digital open mics for electronic literature. And it's actually not as hard as it sounds. And it was pretty great because one thing that it did show was there isn't one thing called electronic literature, which is also what I'm hearing in terms of digital humanities, right? Big tent. But also that a lot of people, it's very, it's collaborative and community-based and performative. It sometimes requires actually embodied performance to have the digital effect. So that's something that I would love to see more of, and especially for students, because I think they're already producing digital storytelling in lots of ways. I mean, when I enter the classroom, I'm never the expert on digital literature. I'm the expert on digital literary history and theory, but not on the current stuff. And so open mics like that, Pam, we should bring him back.
And that's a really good reminder, and both of your talks remind us of this, that our students are experts, and they're our teachers as much as we are their teachers. And that's really one of the wonderful ethos of digital humanities when done well, in my opinion. Jessica, and I think, Jonathan, your work speaks to this too. I love the idea of blurring the boundaries between the humanities and the arts. And that's something that our Digital Humanities Center has been focusing on since the return in this phase of the pandemic, since we reopened, of doing artistic experimentation things that we can't do in Zoom. These kinds of things work really well in Zoom, panel discussions and lightning talks, but we've been trying to blur those boundaries in ways that I think both of you are also talking about. And I encourage folks to think about that as you move forward. I think we have time for maybe one more question or comment from.
Can I just comment on the comment in the chat about high schools? Because we've had a lot of success with that as well, in terms of, same thing with alumni is going, we train a lot of teachers at San Diego State, and they go into the community, and now a lot of them are interested in digital literature in different ways. But also we did a high school outreach to the local after school programs in San Diego of building electronic literature. And then we brought them to, this was before COVID, and brought them to campus to the Digital Humanities Center, where they had their own showcase. A lot of students that had never necessarily not only seen themselves in a college campus, but never thought they would be on a college campus. And here they were, like, reading digital poetry that they had created in after school programs. And again, it's not that hard. It really is about collaboration, as Jonathan's saying, and about kind of listening and being creative. And it was so beautiful and impactful. So I would just say, like, yes to the high schools, and yes to the kind of merger of connections across disciplinary and institutional divides.
Would anyone like to get the last word? Oh, we just got the alert that our breakout room is closing in a matter of seconds.
No, I just want to say, thank you to Jessica for sharing your work. I'm and you, Pam, too, for facilitating this. But this whole conference, I've been inspired, and so I'm just so glad that I was able to be here. So thank you to everyone who showed up, and I'm just really honored to be a part of this. So thank you.
Yeah, lovely to meet you and see all of you virtually. Yeah. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you so much. I think we can move back into the main room, and thanks to both of you for a fantastic set of talks.